The howling wind drowned out Zara Vance's desperate screams as the wagon tilted precariously on the edge of the ravine, snow blinding her vision and fear paralyzing her limbs. It was December of 1868, and what should have been a simple journey to Sacramento had turned into a nightmare as the blizzard descended upon the Sierra Nevada with merciless fury. Zara had never imagined her 22nd year would end this way. She had left her home in Boston 4 months prior, determined to forge a new life in California after the passing of her parents. The promise of a teaching position in Sacramento had been her salvation, a chance to rebuild what grief had taken from her. Now, as the horses screamed and the wagon driver lost control on the icy mountain pass, that promise seemed cruelly distant. "Hold on." The driver shouted, his voice barely audible above the storm. The older man pulled desperately at the reins, but it was too late. The wagon wheels slid across the ice, the horses panicked, and Zara felt the sickening sensation of falling as the wagon tipped over the edge. The world became a chaotic blur of wood, snow, and pain. Zara's body was thrown against the side of the wagon as it tumbled down the slope. She heard the terrible sound of splintering wood, felt the crushing weight as supplies and trunks fell upon her. Something struck her head and darkness swallowed her consciousness. When awareness returned, it came in fragments, cold, unbearable cold seeping into her bones. Pain radiating from her left leg, the taste of blood in her mouth, and darkness pressing against her from all sides. Zara realized she was trapped beneath the overturned wagon, pinned by debris and partially buried in snow. The small space around her was rapidly filling with more snow as the blizzard raged on. She tried to move, but searing pain shot through her leg, forcing a cry from her lips. "Help," she called, though she knew it was futile. They had been miles from any settlement when the accident occurred. The driver, poor Mr. Hendricks, she could not see him anywhere. Was he buried too, or had he been thrown clear? "Please, someone help." Only the howling wind answered her pleas. Hours passed, or perhaps it was minutes' time lost meaning as the cold numbed Zara's body and mind. She drifted in and out of consciousness, each time expecting to never awaken again. She thought of her parents, wondered if she would soon join them, dying alone in this frozen wilderness without having truly lived. The sound came so gradually that at first Zara thought it was just the wind changing direction. But then she recognized the rhythmic crunch of footsteps in snow. Someone was approaching. "Hello," she called, her voice weak. "I'm here under the wagon." The footsteps stopped. For a terrifying moment, Zara feared whoever it was had not heard her and would continue on their way. Then came the sound of movement, closer now. "I hear you," a man's voice, deep and steady. "Hold on," Zara could have wept with relief. "Please hurry," she called. "I can't feel my legs anymore." The sound of wood being moved, of snow being shoveled away, filled her ears. Light began to filter through cracks in the wreckage as someone systematically cleared away the debris trapping her. "I'm going to get you out," the voice promised. "Just stay with me." After what seemed an eternity, the pressure on Zara's body lessened as pieces of the broken wagon were lifted away. Finally, a gap opened above her, and through it, she saw a man's face, partially obscured by a snow-dusted bandana, his eyes a startling blue against the white landscape. "There you are," he said, his breath visible in the frigid air. "Don't worry, madam, I've got you." With careful movements, he widened the opening, then reached down to her. "Can you move at all?" "My leg," Zara managed through chattering teeth. "I think it's broken." The man nodded. "I'm going to have to lift you out. It might hurt." "Just do it," she whispered. Strong arms slid beneath her, and with surprising gentleness, the stranger lifted her from the wreckage. Pain shot through her leg, drawing a cry from her lips, but then she was free of the wagon, cradled against a broad chest as the blizzard swirled around them. "Mr. Hendricks," she gasped, remembering the driver. "He was with me." The man's expression darkened. "I found him first." "I'm sorry, madam, he didn't make it." Grief and shock washed over Zara, but she had no time to process the news as the stranger carried her through the snow. "I've got a cabin not far from here," he explained, trudging through the knee-deep drifts. "Name's Jake Foster. I was out checking my traps when I spotted what was left of your wagon." Zara Vance, she replied weakly. Thank you for finding me. Jake adjusted his hold on her. Let's get you warm before you thank me. You're half frozen. As he carried her through the blinding snow, Zara caught glimpses of his face when the wind momentarily abated. Strong jawline, weathered skin, and those remarkable blue eyes that seemed to cut through the storm. His movements were sure despite the treacherous terrain, and he held her with care, mindful of her injured leg. After what seemed miles but was likely only a short distance, a small log cabin appeared through the curtain of white. Smoke curled from the chimney, a beacon of hope in the wilderness. Almost there, Jake assured her, his voice strained now from the exertion. He pushed open the door with his shoulder and carried her inside. Blessed warmth enveloped Zara as they entered the cabin. A fire crackled in the stone fireplace, casting golden light across the simple interior, a wooden table and chairs, a bed in the corner, shelves stocked with provisions. Jake placed her carefully on the bed. I need to see to your leg, he said, unwinding the bandana from his face to reveal a strong nose and firm mouth partially hidden beneath a trim beard. And get you out of those wet clothes before frostbite sets in. Under different circumstances, Zara might have protested at the impropriety, but survival outweighed modesty. She nodded weakly. With efficient movements, Jake removed her snow-crusted coat and boots. When he reached for the buttons of her dress, he hesitated. I've got a shirt and trousers you can change into, he said, retrieving the garments from a trunk. They'll be too big, but they're dry. Can you manage, or do you need help? I can manage, Zara said, though she wasn't entirely certain. But turn around, please. Jake nodded and turned his back, busying himself with adding wood to the fire. With trembling fingers, Zara struggled with the buttons of her dress, finally freeing herself from the sodden garment. The shirt Jake had provided was soft from wear and smelled of pine and smoke as she pulled it over her head. The trousers were another matter with her injured leg. She could barely lift her hips to pull them on. Mr. Foster, she said reluctantly, I need assistance after all. He approached with respectful caution, helping her into the trousers while keeping his eyes averted as much as possible. Once she was dressed, he carefully examined her leg, his touch clinical but gentle. It's broken, he confirmed. I'll need to set it and splint it. Zara swallowed hard. Have you done this before? A ghost of a smile touched his lips. More times than I'd like to count. Out here, you learn to be your own doctor. He gathered supplies, straight pieces of wood for a splint, strips of cloth for binding, and a bottle of whiskey. Drink, he instructed, offering her the bottle. It'll help with the pain. Zara took a reluctant sip, grimacing at the burn. Jake took the bottle back and set it aside. Ready? He asked, positioning his hands on her legs. Zara nodded, her fingers gripping the bedding. Without further warning, Jake pulled sharply, realigning the bone. Zara's scream echoed through the cabin and tears streamed down her face as waves of agony crashed over her. Worst part's over, Jake said, working quickly to secure the splint. You're doing fine. When he finished, he helped her lie back against the pillows, then covered her with several blankets. He brought her a cup of hot tea sweetened with honey, which she accepted gratefully. The blizzard's getting worse, he said, glancing toward the window where snow pelted the glass. We're going to be here for a few days at least. What about Mr. Hendricks? Zara asked, remembering the driver. Jake's expression sobered. I'll bury him when the storm passes. Nothing can be done for him now. Zara closed her eyes, fatigue overwhelming her. I was going to Sacramento, she murmured, for a teaching position. Sacramento's still a good distance away, Jake replied, but we can worry about that later. Rest now. As Zara drifted into an exhausted sleep, her last conscious thought was of the stranger who had saved her life, and how fate had delivered her from one peril into the hands of the unknown. When Zara awoke, daylight filtered through the cabin's small windows, though the glass remained frosted with ice. For a moment, disoriented by her surroundings, she tried to sit up only to be reminded of her injury by the sharp pain in her leg. Easy now, came Jake's voice from across the room. He was at the stove, stirring something in a pot. That leg needs time to heal. Memory flooded back the accident, being trapped, Jake finding her. How long have I slept? She asked, her throat dry. Almost a full day, he replied, bringing her a cup of water. You needed it. Zara drank gratefully, studying her rescuer in the light of day. He was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 28 or 30, with sun-weathered skin and dark hair that brushed his collar. His blue eyes held a wariness that suggested he'd seen his share of hardship, but there was kindness there too. Thank you, she said simply, for saving my life. Jake nodded once, accepting her gratitude without elaboration. Hungry, I've got venison stew. At the mention of food, Zara realized she was famished. Yes, please. He brought her a bowl and helped her sit up, propping pillows behind her back. The stew was hearty and flavorful, warming her from the inside. As she ate, Jake sat in a chair nearby, his own bowl in hand. The storm's still raging, he said between bites. Might be the worst blizzard we've had in these parts for years. You live here alone? Zara asked, glancing around the modest cabin. Going on 5 years now, he confirmed. Came west after the war, wasn't much left for me back east. The war. Those simple words conveyed volumes. Like so many men, Jake Foster had fought in the war between the states, an experience that had clearly shaped him. Are you a trapper? Zara asked, noting the furs hanging on one wall, among other things. Hunt, trap, guide travelers through the mountains when needed, do whatever it takes to get by. He set his empty bowl aside. What about you? What brings a proper Eastern lady to these parts alone? Zara bristled slightly at being called proper, though she supposed compared to the rugged lifestyle of the West, her upbringing had been sheltered. I'm not as proper as you might think, Mr. Foster, and I wasn't always alone. Mr. Hendricks was hired to bring me from the last stage stop to Sacramento. She paused, remembering the kindly driver who had regaled her with stories of the West during their journey. I came because there's nothing left for me in Boston. My parents died of influenza last spring within weeks of each other. Jake's expression softened with understanding. I'm sorry to hear that. The school board in Sacramento advertised for a teacher. I have experience. I taught at Girls Academy in Boston for 2 years. It seemed like a chance to start anew. Sacramento's a growing city, Jake acknowledged. Rough in parts, but there are decent folks there too. Have you been there? Zara asked. A shadow crossed his face. A few times, prefer the mountains myself. There was a story there, Zara sensed, but Jake didn't elaborate and she didn't press. They were strangers thrown together by circumstance. After all, how bad is my leg? She asked instead, changing the subject. Clean break, he replied. If you're careful and give it time to heal properly, you should walk fine again. How much time? Jake shrugged. 6 weeks, maybe more, hard to say. The reality of her situation sank in. 6 weeks in this remote cabin with a stranger. 6 weeks before she could even think about continuing to Sacramento, assuming she could find transportation. What if the school board gave her position to someone else? I can't stay here that long, she said, alarm rising in her voice. I need to get to Sacramento. The term is supposed to start after the new year. Miss Vance, Jake said firmly, even if the storm cleared today, you're in no condition to travel, and no one's crossing these mountains in this weather anyway. Zara felt tears of frustration welling in her eyes. She blinked them back, unwilling to appear weak. I understand, this position meant everything to me, a fresh start. Jake studied her for a long moment. When the weather permits, I can get word to Sacramento about what happened, let them know you're delayed but still coming. Relief washed over her. You would do that? I said I would, didn't I? There was no irritation in his tone, just matter-of-factness. In the meantime, you focus on healing. We'll figure out the rest as we go. The next several days established a routine of sorts. The blizzard continued unabated, forcing them to remain inside the cabin. Jake tended to Zara's needs with surprising gentleness, changing the bandages on her leg, preparing meals, and ensuring she was comfortable. Despite his initial reticence, Jake gradually opened up as they shared the confined space. Zara learned he had fought for the Union, rising to the rank of captain before a bullet through his shoulder ended his military career. After the war, finding his family farm in Pennsylvania sold for taxes and his parents deceased, he had headed west, seeking solitude and a fresh start. Not so different from you, he remarked one evening as they sat before the fire, Zara mending a tear in one of his shirts while he cleaned his rifle. Both of us running from what we lost. I prefer to think of it as running toward something new, Zara countered. Jake's mouth quirked in what might have been a smile. Optimistic, I like that. In turn, Zara shared stories of her life in Boston, her years teaching, and her parents, her father a bookkeeper, her mother a seamstress. She spoke of their dreams for her, dreams that had never included her venturing alone to the wild frontier. They would have worried, she admitted. But I think they would have understood. After they were gone, everything familiar became painful. Every street, every shop reminded me of them. I know that feeling, Jake said quietly. On the fifth day, the storm finally abated, revealing a world transformed into a pristine white landscape. Jake ventured out to check his traps and, as promised, to properly bury Mr. Hendricks. He returned hours later, snow crusted on his boots and coat, his face grim. It's done, he said simply when Zara asked about the driver. Said some words over him, best I could do under the circumstances. Thank you, Zara replied. He was kind to me during our journey. Said he had a daughter about my age. Jake nodded, removing his snow-covered outer garments. Found some of your belongings scattered around the wreck, brought back what I could. He produced a battered trunk and a smaller valise. Zara's eyes widened in surprise and gratitude. My books. I thought they were lost. Jake set the containers beside the bed. Not much else survived, I'm afraid. The wagon broke apart pretty thoroughly. Zara opened the trunk, relieved to find her precious books mostly intact, though some were water-damaged. The valise contained some of her clothing, dresses, undergarments, a shawl, all in need of cleaning and drying, but salvageable. This means more than I can say, she told Jake. These books, they were my father's, they're all I have left of him. Jake watched her handle the volumes with care. You really do intend to teach, don't you? Not just looking for a husband out west like some women. Zara shot him a sharp look. Is that what you think, that women only come west to find husbands? He raised his hands in a placating gesture. Just making an observation. Seen it plenty of times, women answering advertisements, coming out to marry men they've never met. Well, I am not one of those women, Zara said firmly. I came for the position, to build a life of my own making. Jake's expression was unreadable. Independent, that's good. You'll need that spirit out here. As the days passed, Zara's strength returned, though her leg remained splinted and painful. Jake fashioned a crude crutch for her so she could move around the cabin, a development that preserved her sanity and gave her a measure of independence. She insisted on contributing to the household tasks, taking over the cooking when Jake was out trapping or hunting. Though limited by her resources, she managed to create meals that earned appreciative nods from her taciturn host. Where did you learn to cook like this? He asked one evening after a particularly successful rabbit stew. My mother, Zara replied, pleased by the compliment. She believed a woman should know how to run a household regardless of her station. Smart woman, Jake commented, sopping up the last of his stew with a piece of cornbread. 2 weeks after the accident, Jake announced he would attempt the journey to the nearest settlement, a mining camp called Pine Tree Gulch about 20 miles away. I need to replenish some supplies, he explained, and I can send word to Sacramento about your situation. Zara felt a flutter of apprehension at the thought of being left alone. How long will you be gone? 2, maybe 3 days if the trails are clear enough, he said, packing supplies into a rucksack. You'll be fine. There's plenty of wood for the fire, food in the pantry. Keep the rifle close, though I doubt you'll need it. He showed her how to operate the weapon, though Zara prayed she would have no cause to use it. As Jake prepared to leave the following morning, she felt an unexpected pang of, what, not quite fear, something else. Be careful, she said as he stood at the door, bundled against the cold. Jake paused, studying her face. I will, you just focus on that leg healing. Then, with a nod, he was gone, the door closing firmly behind him. Alone in the cabin, Zara was struck by the sudden silence. Over the past weeks, she had grown accustomed to Jake's presence, the sound of his movements, his deep voice, even his silences, which were never uncomfortable. The first day passed slowly. Zara read, napped, and hobbled around the cabin, straightening things that didn't need straightening. She studied Jake's few possessions with curiosity, a small collection of books that revealed a more educated mind than she'd initially assumed. A wooden box containing letters tied with string. A sketch of a farmhouse she guessed was his childhood home. On the second day, restlessness drove her to more activity than was wise. Her leg ached fiercely by evening, a reminder that healing took time and patience. As she lay in bed that night, listening to the wind rattling the shutters, Zara realized something startling. She missed Jake. Not just for the security his presence provided, but for himself, his dry humor, his quiet competence, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners on those rare occasions when he smiled. The realization disturbed her. She had come west to be independent, to build a new life centered around her teaching career, not to develop feelings for a solitary mountain man. Besides, what did she really know about Jake Foster? A few weeks of forced proximity didn't make them anything more than temporary companions of circumstance. On the afternoon of the third day, as Zara was beginning to worry, the sound of approaching footsteps crunching through snow brought her to the window. Relief flooded through her at the sight of Jake's tall figure approaching the cabin, laden with supplies. She had the door open before he reached it, her smile broader than she intended. "You're back." Jake's eyebrows rose slightly at her enthusiastic greeting. "Told you I would be." He stamped the snow from his boots and entered, setting down his packs. "How's the leg?" "Better, I think. Though I may have overdone it yesterday." He frowned. "You need to be careful. Set yourself back and you'll be here even longer." There was something in his tone, a hint of strain or perhaps fatigue from the journey. "Was there trouble at Pine Tree Gulch?" Zara asked. Jake began unpacking the supplies: coffee, flour, sugar, salt, ammunition, and other necessities. "Nothing serious. Got your message to Sacramento, though. Found a man heading that way with the mail." "Thank you," Zara said sincerely. "Did he think it would reach them before the term starts?" Jake hesitated, then nodded. "Should do. Also asked about transportation for when you're healed. There's a stage that runs through the gulch once a month, weather permitting. Next one's due in about 4 weeks. 4 weeks. If her leg healed as expected, the timing might work." "That's fortunate," she said. "There's something else," Jake said, his expression guarded. "Got some news while I was there. The law's looking for a man named William Blackwell. Bank robbery in Sacramento 3 months back. Shot a teller." Zara frowned, confused by the apparent change of subject. "That's terrible, but what does it have to do with us?" "Nothing, just news." Jake continued unpacking, not meeting her eyes. "Thought you should know what's happening in the city you're heading to." Something in his manner struck Zara as odd, but she couldn't place what it was. Before she could question him further, Jake announced he was going to check his traps, despite having just returned from a 3-day journey. Alone again, Zara pondered his strange behavior. Was he simply tired from the trip? Or was there something he wasn't telling her? The answer came that night. Jake returned from checking his traps, bringing a brace of rabbits for dinner. As they ate, he was quieter than usual, lost in thought. "Jake," Zara said finally, using his given name for the first time, "is something wrong? You've been acting strangely since you returned." He looked up from his plate, conflict evident in his blue eyes. "Just tired from the journey." "I don't believe you," Zara said simply. Jake set down his fork and regarded her for a long moment. "You're more perceptive than I gave you credit for, Miss Vance." "Zara," she corrected. "After all this time, I think we can use our given names." A fleeting smile crossed his face. "Zara, then." The smile faded. "Truth is, there was talk at the Gulch about me. Questions." "What sort of questions?" Jake's jaw tightened. "The kind that follow a man who's trying to leave his past behind." Understanding dawned on Zara. "You're hiding from something." It wasn't a question, but Jake answered anyway. "Not exactly hiding, just starting over. There are those who wouldn't understand some choices I made after the war." Zara waited, sensing there was more he needed to say. "I did things during the war I'm not proud of," Jake continued, his voice low. "Followed orders that haunted me afterward. When it ended, I couldn't go back to being the person I was before. So you came west." He nodded. "Tried to build something honest, something good." His eyes met hers, intense and searching. I'm not the bank robber they're looking for, if that's what you're wondering. Never shot a man who wasn't trying to shoot me first. I wasn't wondering that at all, Zara said truthfully. In the weeks she had known him, Jake had shown himself to be honorable, if complicated. Whatever your past holds, you saved my life. That counts for something in my ledger. Relief flickered across his features. There are men back east, powerful men who might disagree with your assessment. Men who lost money because of testimony I gave about war profiteering. You testified against profiteers, Zara asked, surprised. Jake nodded grimly. My regiment was sent into battle with faulty rifles and rotten supplies while contractors got rich. After the war, when investigations started, I spoke up, made enemies. Powerful enemies who followed you west, Zara surmised. Their reach is long, Jake confirmed, but I've kept to myself, stayed out of trouble, until now. Until you rescued me, Zara said softly, understanding dawning. By going to Pine Tree Gulch, you risked being recognized, Jake shrugged. Couldn't leave you without medical supplies or sending word to Sacramento. Besides, I needed provisions anyway. The simple statement moved Zara deeply. This man, who had every reason to avoid contact with others, had risked his hard-won anonymity for her sake. I won't tell anyone about you, she promised. When I reach Sacramento, I know you won't, Jake interrupted, his trust in her evident. But it doesn't change the fact that I can't take you there myself. Disappointment flickered through Zara, though she understood his reasoning. The stage from Pine Tree Gulch will suffice. Jake nodded, though he didn't look entirely satisfied with the arrangement. It's for the best. That night, as Zara lay awake listening to the wind outside and Jake's steady breathing from his bedroll near the fire, she found herself facing an uncomfortable truth. The prospect of leaving this cabin, leaving Jake in a few short weeks, filled her with a peculiar sadness she hadn't anticipated. The following days brought a shift in their relationship. Now that Jake had shared something of his past, a new ease developed between them. They talked more freely, shared stories, even laughed together. Jake proved to have a dry wit that surfaced when he was relaxed, and Zara found herself deliberately trying to draw it out. As Zara's mobility improved, Jake began taking her on short walks outside the cabin, supporting her when necessary. The winter landscape was breathtaking, pristine, snow stretching to the horizon, pine trees heavy with white, mountains rising majestically in the distance. It's beautiful, Zara said one afternoon as they stood outside the cabin, her breath visible in the cold air. That it is, Jake agreed, though when she glanced at him, he was looking at her, not the scenery. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, a moment of recognition that transcended words. Zara felt her cheeks warm despite the chill, and Jake quickly looked away. We should head back, he said, his voice gruffer than usual. Don't want you overexerting that leg. As they turned toward the cabin, Zara's crutch slipped on a patch of ice. She cried out, starting to fall, but Jake's arms were around her in an instant, steadying her. I've got you, he said, his face close to hers. Time seemed to suspend as they stood there, Jake's arms still holding her, their breaths mingling in the cold air. Zara was acutely aware of his strength, the warmth of his body against hers, the intensity in his blue eyes. For a wild moment, she thought he might kiss her, wanted him to kiss her, she realized with startling clarity. But then Jake carefully set her upright, ensuring she had her balance before stepping back. Careful on the ice, he said, his voice controlled again. Let's get you inside. That evening, a strange tension hung in the cabin. Jake was quieter than usual, and Zara found herself watching him covertly as he moved about his tasks. The attraction she felt was undeniable now that she had acknowledged it to herself. But was it merely gratitude and proximity, or something deeper, and what of Jake? That moment outside, had she imagined the look in his eyes? Was she foolishly misinterpreting common courtesy from a man who had already done far more for her than could be expected? As the weeks passed, Zara's leg continued to heal, and she required the crutch less frequently for short distances. They settled into a comfortable routine, sharing the cabin's tasks according to their abilities. Jake taught Zara how to play chess using a set he had carved himself, and they spent many evenings engaged in matches by the fireside. Through these quiet interactions, Zara learned more about the complex man who had saved her life. Behind Jake's reserved exterior lay a thoughtful mind and a deep sense of justice. He read philosophy and history, discussed politics with surprising insight, and revealed a knowledge of literature that matched her own. How did a Pennsylvania farm boy become so well-read? She asked one evening after he had quoted Shakespeare. A shadow of old pain crossed Jake's face. My mother was a schoolteacher before she married, insisted on education even after we moved to the farm. Then the war came, and I saw things that made me question everything I'd been taught. Reading became a way to make sense of it all. And did you make sense of it? Jake smiled ruefully. Not entirely. But I learned that most things in life aren't as simple as they first appear. Like you, Zara said softly. His eyes met hers across the chessboard. Like us all, I imagine. As the day of the stage's arrival approached, an unspoken melancholy descended on the cabin. Neither Zara nor Jake spoke directly of her impending departure, but it colored their interactions nonetheless. Zara found herself memorizing details of the cabin, of their shared life these past weeks, of Jake himself. The night before she was to leave for Pine Tree Gulch, Jake presented her with a small wooden box. "What's this?" Zara asked, taking it curiously. "Open it," he urged. Inside, nestled on a bed of soft cloth, lay a delicate carving of a mountain bluebird in flight attached to a leather cord. "Jake," she breathed, lifting the pendant. "It's beautiful." "Thought you should have something to remember the mountains by," he said, his voice gruff with emotion he clearly tried to suppress. "Bluebirds are rare up here, harbingers of spring and new beginnings." Zara swallowed the lump forming in her throat. "Will you help me put it on?" Jake took the pendant, and Zara turned, lifting her hair. His fingers brushed the nape of her neck as he secured the cord, sending a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with the cold. When she turned back to face him, he was closer than she expected, his expression unguarded for once, revealing a longing that mirrored her own. "Zara," he began, then stopped, searching for words. "Yes," she prompted, her heart racing. Jake's hand reached up to touch her cheek, the calloused palm gentle against her skin. "I'm not good at this," he admitted. "At saying what I feel." "Then don't say it," Zara whispered, leaning into his touch. "Show me." For a heartbeat, Jake hesitated, conflict visible in his eyes. Then, with a soft sound that might have been surrender, he leaned down and kissed her. The kiss was tentative at first, a question rather than a demand. But when Zara responded, her hands coming up to rest on his chest, it deepened into something more profound, an expression of all the unspoken feelings that had grown between them in their shared isolation. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Jake rested his forehead against hers. "I didn't plan for this," he confessed. "For you, nor I for you," Zara replied, "but here we are." "You're still leaving tomorrow," Jake said, the words heavy with regret. Zara pulled back slightly to see his face. "I have to. I made a commitment, and you." "You have your reasons for staying here away from Sacramento." Jake nodded, the conflict clear in his expression. "I wish things were different." "So do I," Zara admitted, "but wishing doesn't make it so." They stayed up late that night, talking, sharing memories and small confidences, stealing kisses that grew increasingly desperate as the hours ticked away. Neither mentioned a future beyond the morning, for what future could there be? Their paths were set in different directions, Zara to her teaching position in Sacramento, Jake to his solitary existence in the mountains. When dawn came, harsh and final, they prepared for the journey to Pine Tree Gulch in somber silence. Jake had arranged for a local trapper to guide Zara to the settlement in time for the stage's arrival, unwilling to risk being seen there again himself. As they waited for the guide outside the cabin, Jake handed Zara a folded piece of paper. "My location, if you ever need to find me," he explained. "Though it would be safer for both of us if you didn't." Zara tucked the paper into her bodice, close to her heart. "Thank you for everything." The sound of approaching hoofbeats signaled the arrival of her guide. Jake tensed, his hand moving instinctively toward his rifle before recognizing the rider. "That's Thomas," he said. "He's trustworthy." The grizzled trapper reined in his horse and nodded a greeting. "Morning, Foster. This the lady. This is Miss Vance," Jake confirmed. "She needs to catch today's stage to Sacramento." Thomas eyed Zara's splinted leg. "Can she ride?" "I can," Zara assured him, though in truth she had limited experience on horseback. "I'll manage." Jake helped her mount the spare horse Thomas had brought, his hands lingering at her waist. "Be careful in Sacramento," he said quietly. "It's not Boston." "I will," she promised. Their eyes held for a long moment, so much left unsaid between them. Then Thomas clicked his tongue and the horses began to move. Zara looked back once as they rode away. Jake stood before his cabin, a solitary figure against the snow and pine, his hand raised in farewell. She raised her own in response, then turned forward, blinking away tears as they entered the forest. The journey to Pine Tree Gulch was arduous despite Thomas's careful pace. By the time they reached the mining settlement, a collection of rough buildings nestled in a valley, Zara's leg throbbed with pain, and she was exhausted. "Stage is due within the hour," Thomas informed her as he helped her dismount outside the settlement's only hotel, a generous term for the two-story wooden structure. "You can wait inside." The hotel's common room was crowded with miners, travelers, and locals. Conversations paused briefly as Zara entered, curious eyes taking in her splinted leg and travel-worn appearance, before resuming with increased volume. Thomas secured her a chair near the fire and ordered her a meal before departing with a gruff nod, his obligation to Jake fulfilled. As Zara waited, picking at the surprisingly palatable stew the hotel provided, she couldn't help overhearing snippets of conversation around her. One exchange between two men at a nearby table caught her attention. "Caught him near Carson City last week," one man was saying. "That Foster fella." Zara froze, her spoon halfway to her mouth. "You sure it's him?" the second man asked. "Been chasing that ghost for years." "Marshall's sure, got a witness from back east who identified him. They're bringing him to Sacramento for trial." The first man chuckled. "Reckon them rich fellas he testified against are mighty pleased. Fraud charges won't stick, but they'll find something. Always do when there's money involved." Zara's mind raced. They weren't talking about bank robbery now, but about Jake's testimony against the war profiteers. And they had the wrong man. Jake was in his cabin, miles away, or was he? A sudden, horrible thought occurred to her. What if Jake had lied about his identity? What if he truly was William Blackwell, the bank robber? No, she dismissed the thought immediately. She might not know everything about Jake Foster, but she knew enough to be certain he was no cold-blooded killer. The man who had gently tended her injured leg, who had carved a bluebird pendant with such care, who had kissed her with such tenderness, that man was no murderer. Which meant an innocent man had been arrested in his place. The stage arrived with a clatter of hooves and creaking wheels, interrupting Zara's troubled thoughts. Passengers disembarked, stretching tired limbs, while others prepared to board for the journey to Sacramento. Zara faced a decision. She could board the stage as planned, continue to Sacramento, and begin her new life as a teacher. The sensible choice. The safe choice. Or she could return to warn Jake that men were still hunting him, that someone had been wrongfully arrested in his place. But that would mean abandoning her position, perhaps forfeiting her future as a teacher altogether. As the stagecoach driver called for passengers, Zara stood, gripping her crutch tightly. She knew what she had to do. "Excuse me," she said, approaching the driver. "Is there passage available to Sacramento?" The driver looked her over, his gaze lingering on her splinted leg. "Got room, but it's a rough ride, miss. Sure you're up for it with that injury?" Zara nodded firmly. "I'm certain." Minutes later, she was settled inside the coach alongside 5 other passengers, a middle-aged couple, a young miner heading to the city to sell his claim, and 2 businessmen discussing investments. As the stage lurched into motion, Zara stared out the window at the receding settlement, her mind made up. She would go to Sacramento as planned, but not to take up her teaching position, at least, not immediately. First, she would find out more about this case against Foster. If an innocent man had been arrested, she had a moral obligation to speak up, regardless of her personal connection to Jake. The journey was indeed rough. jolting Zara's injured leg painfully with every rut and stone in the road. By the time they reached Sacramento 3 days later, she was feverish with pain and exhaustion. Sacramento in 1869 was a city in transformation. The completion of the transcontinental railroad that may have accelerated its growth, bringing new residents and commerce. The streets bustled with activity as Zara emerged from the stage station, leaning heavily on her crutch. Her first priority was finding lodging. Using some of her dwindling funds, she secured a small room at a boarding house that catered to respectable single women. The landlady, Mrs. Holloway, raised an eyebrow at Zara's injured leg, but asked no questions beyond confirming she could pay the weekly rate. After resting for a day to recover from the journey, Zara ventured out to the school board office. She owed them an explanation, even if she now had other priorities. The board's secretary, a pinch-faced woman named Miss Perkins, regarded Zara with skepticism as she explained about the accident and her delayed arrival. "We received word about your situation," Miss Perkins said, her tone suggesting she found the entire story suspect. "However, as you failed to arrive by the agreed date, the board was forced to offer the position to another candidate." Despite having anticipated this outcome, Zara felt a pang of disappointment. "I understand. Please convey my apologies to the board." "Is there any possibility of another position becoming available?" Zara asked, not ready to abandon her teaching aspirations entirely. Miss Perkins consulted a ledger. "Nothing at present. Perhaps in the autumn term should your condition improve." Her gaze flicked meaningfully to Zara's splinted leg. "Thank you for your time," Zara said, keeping her dignity intact as she left the office. With her original plan derailed, Zara turned her attention to her more immediate concern, learning about the man arrested in Jake's place. Her first stop was the Sacramento Bee office, where she purchased recent newspapers and scanned them for any mention of the arrest. On the third page of the previous week's edition, she found it. Suspected war fraud witness apprehended James Foster, sought for questioning in connection with post-war testimony against military suppliers, was arrested near Carson City last week. Foster, who disappeared after providing damaging evidence against several prominent Eastern businessmen, is also wanted for questioning regarding a bank robbery in Sacramento last fall. The article went on to describe Foster as a former Union captain who had vanished after the congressional hearings, leading some to question the veracity of his testimony. It included a crude sketch of the arrested man, a bearded fellow who, even in the rough newspaper illustration, bore only a passing resemblance to the Jake Foster Zara knew. They had the wrong man. She was certain of it, but how could she prove it without revealing Jake's true location? Over the next week, Zara gathered information carefully. She visited the courthouse, pretending to be a concerned distant relative of the arrested man, and learned that he was being held in the city jail awaiting formal charges. The trial was scheduled for the following month. She also learned that representatives of the Eastern businessmen Jake had testified against had arrived in Sacramento, eager to see the man who had cost them government contracts face charges of perjury and fraud. Meanwhile, to support herself, Zara found employment at a small bookshop owned by a kindly older couple, the Harringtons. Her knowledge of literature impressed Mr. Harrington, while her refined manners reassured Mrs. Harrington of her respectability. The work was not teaching, but it allowed Zara to earn enough to maintain her room at the boarding house while her leg continued to heal. As January turned to February, Zara faced a dilemma. She now had confirmation that an innocent man was imprisoned, mistaken for Jake. She could not in good conscience allow this injustice to continue. Yet revealing what she knew would mean exposing Jake's true location, putting him at risk. There had to be another way. The opportunity came unexpectedly. While sorting new inventory at the bookshop, Zara overheard a conversation between Mr. Harrington and a customer, a lawyer named Prescott, who was discussing the upcoming trial. "It's all rather convenient," Prescott was saying. Foster disappears after the hearings, then suddenly turns up years later just as the statute of limitations is about to expire on potential countersuits. You think the arrest is politically motivated? Mr. Harrington asked. I think powerful men hold grudges, Prescott replied. And this Foster fellow made some dangerous enemies. After the lawyer left, Zara approached Mr. Harrington. That gentleman, is he involved in the Foster case? Mr. Harrington looked surprised by her interest. Richard Prescott, not directly. He's a defense attorney with a reputation for taking on unpopular causes. Why do you ask? Just curious, Zara said, keeping her tone casual. I've read about the case in the papers. That evening, Zara made a decision. She would approach Prescott, tell him what she knew without revealing Jake's identity or location. Perhaps there was a way to free the wrongfully arrested man without endangering Jake. The following morning, she visited Prescott's office. The lawyer, a middle-aged man with shrewd eyes and a carefully trimmed beard, listened with growing interest as Zara explained that she had reason to believe the man in custody was not the real James Foster. And how would you know this? Prescott asked, regarding her carefully. Zara had prepared for this question. I encountered the real Captain Foster during my journey west, she said, which was true as far as it went. The man in your jail is not him. Interesting, Prescott said, and where might the real Captain Foster be now? I couldn't say, Zara replied, technically honest, but I'm certain the man you have is innocent of being Foster. Prescott leaned back in his chair, considering. Without the real Foster to compare him to, or someone willing to testify under oath, this is merely speculation, Miss Vance. There must be military records, Zara suggested. Descriptions, perhaps even photographs of the real Captain Foster from during the war. Indeed, Prescott agreed, and I've requested such records. But bureaucracy moves slowly, and our Eastern friends seem remarkably well connected when it comes to delaying such requests. So an innocent man remains in jail while the real culprits go free, Zara said bitterly. Justice is rarely swift, Miss Vance, especially when wealth and influence are involved. Prescott studied her intently. You seem unusually invested in this case for someone with no personal connection. Zara met his gaze steadily. I believe in justice, Mr. Prescott. And I dislike seeing powerful men abuse their position to persecute others. A smile touched the lawyer's lips. A sentiment I share. Very well, Miss Vance. I'll pursue this angle. If you think of any way to definitively prove the man in custody is not Foster, please let me know. As Zara left Prescott's office, a plan began forming in her mind. She couldn't reveal Jake's location, but perhaps there was another way to prove the arrested man's innocence. That evening, after closing the bookshop, Zara returned to her boarding house and retrieved the folded paper Jake had given her, the one with directions to his cabin. She studied it carefully, memorizing the landmarks and paths he had described. Then, with a deep breath, she burned the paper in the small fireplace of her room, watching the ash scatter and disappear. The next day, Zara visited the offices of the Sacramento Bee again, this time asking to speak with a reporter. She was directed to a young man named Daniel Harper, whose articles on the Foster case she had read. Miss Vance, is it? Harper said, offering her a seat across from his cluttered desk. What can I do for you? I have information about the Foster case, Zara said without preamble. Information that proves the man in custody is not Captain James Foster. Harper's eyebrows rose. That's a significant claim. May I ask how you came by this information? I knew Captain Foster during the war, Zara lied, having rehearsed her story carefully. I worked as a nurse in a military hospital where he was treated for his shoulder wound. And you're certain the man in custody is not him? Positive, Zara said firmly. The real Captain Foster had a distinctive scar on his right hand from a childhood accident. A burn mark in the shape of a crescent moon. The man you have in custody has no such scar. This detail was true. Jake did have such a scar, though he'd gotten it not in childhood but from a hot rifle barrel during a skirmish. It was distinctive enough to be verifiable but common enough in type that it wouldn't immediately identify Jake to anyone searching for him. Harper made notes rapidly. This is very interesting, Miss Vance, but why come forward now? The arrest was weeks ago. I only recently arrived in Sacramento and read about the case, Zara explained. I couldn't in good conscience remain silent when an innocent man might hang for another's crimes. Crimes? Harper asked sharply. The charges are fraud and perjury, not capital offenses. For now, Zara said grimly, but we both know there are those who would happily see more serious charges added if it served their purposes. Harper couldn't deny this logic. I'll need to verify your information. Of course, Zara said, rising to leave. Check the military medical records. They'll confirm the scar. As she departed, Zara prayed her gamble would work. If Harper published the information about the scar, the authorities would have to examine the prisoner. When they found no such mark, doubt would be cast on his identity without revealing anything that could lead them to the real Jake. Over the next 2 weeks, Zara divided her time between working at the bookshop and discreetly following the progress of her plan. Harper's article appeared, raising questions about the prisoner's identity and mentioning the distinctive scar that the real Captain Foster supposedly bore. As she had hoped, the article prompted an examination of the prisoner, who indeed had no such scar. This revelation, combined with Prescott's persistent demands for military records, created enough doubt about the man's identity that the judge ordered further investigation before proceeding with the trial. What Zara hadn't anticipated was the increased scrutiny this would bring to her own story. Harper, proving himself a more thorough journalist than she had expected, attempted to verify her claim of having nursed Foster during the war. Finding no record of a Zara Vance among the nursing staff at any hospital where Foster had been treated, he confronted her at the bookshop. "You lied to me, Miss Vance," he said without preamble when she stepped outside during her lunch break. "You were never a nurse during the war. In fact, according to my sources, you only arrived from Boston a few months ago." Zara's heart raced, but she kept her expression calm. "Mr. Harper, I no more lies," he interrupted. "I want the truth. How do you really know about Foster's scar? What's your connection to this case?" Realizing denial was futile, Zara opted for a partial truth. "Very well, I wasn't a nurse. But I did encounter the real Captain Foster during my journey west. My wagon crashed in a blizzard in the Sierra Nevada. I was trapped under the wreckage, and a man rescued me, a man with a crescent-shaped scar on his right hand who called himself Jake Foster." Harper's eyes widened. "And you believe this was the real Captain James Foster?" "I believe the man who saved my life was not the same man sitting in your jail," Zara said carefully. "Beyond that, I cannot say for certain. Where is this man now, the one who rescued you?" Zara shook her head. "I don't know. After I recovered enough to travel, he arranged for me to be brought to a mining settlement to catch the stage to Sacramento. I never saw him again." Harper studied her, clearly trying to determine if she was telling the truth. "If what you say is true, it could mean an innocent man is in jail. But it could also mean you're harboring a fugitive, Miss Vance." "I'm harboring no one," Zara said truthfully. "I've told you what I know." After Harper left, Zara returned to the bookshop, her mind whirling. She had never intended to become so deeply involved in this case, yet here she was, potentially facing accusations herself if Harper published her revised story. That evening, as she walked back to her boarding house, Zara became aware of footsteps behind her. Glancing back, she saw a well-dressed man following at a discreet distance. When she quickened her pace, so did he. Alarmed, Zara turned down a busier street, hoping to lose her pursuer in the crowd. For a moment, she thought she had succeeded until she felt a hand on her arm. "Miss Vance," a cultured voice said. "A moment of your time, please." Zara turned to face a distinguished-looking gentleman in his 50s, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit. "Who are you? What do you want?" "My name is Edwards. I represent certain interested parties in the Foster case." His smile didn't reach his cold eyes. "I understand you've been making claims about the man in custody." "I've simply stated facts," Zara said, trying to keep her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Facts can be troublesome things," Edwards said smoothly. "As can young women who involve themselves in matters that don't concern them." The threat was unmistakable. Are you threatening me, Mr. Edwards? Merely offering friendly advice. Sacramento can be dangerous for a woman alone. Accidents happen. He tipped his hat. Good evening, Miss Vance. Do consider your position carefully. As he walked away, Zara stood frozen, fear and anger warring within her. These were the men Jake had testified against, men willing to threaten a woman on a public street to protect their interests. How far would they go to silence her? The answer came the following night when Zara awoke to the smell of smoke. Coughing, she stumbled from her bed to find the hallway of the boarding house filled with thick smoke. Flames were already consuming the staircase, trapping her and the other residents on the upper floor. Fire. Zara shouted, pounding on doors to wake the other boarders. Everyone out. Panicked women emerged from their rooms, some still in their night clothes. Mrs. Holloway appeared, directing everyone toward the back stairs, but flames were spreading rapidly, fed by the old wooden structure. Zara helped a younger girl toward the back exit, but a burning beam crashed down, blocking their path. Coughing in the thickening smoke, Zara pulled the girl toward a window instead. "We'll have to jump," she shouted above the roar of the fire. Outside, a crowd had gathered. Men were bringing ladders, trying to reach the trapped women. As Zara helped the girl through the window and into waiting arms, she heard a familiar voice below. "Zara, jump, I'll catch you." Looking down, her heart nearly stopped. Jake stood below, arms outstretched, his face illuminated by the hellish glow of the flames. Without hesitation, Zara climbed onto the windowsill and launched herself into the night air. For a terrifying moment she was falling, then Jake's strong arms caught her, absorbing the impact as they both tumbled to the ground. "Are you hurt?" he asked urgently, helping her to her feet. "No, I'm fine," Zara assured him, though in truth her recently healed leg ached fiercely from the impact. "Jake, what are you doing here?" Before he could answer, a shout went up from the crowd. "There he is, that's Foster." Jake's expression hardened. "No time to explain, we need to go now." Taking her hand, he pulled her through the crowd, moving swiftly away from the burning building and the gathering authorities. They ducked into alleys, moving deeper into the city's maze of streets until they reached a small stable where a horse was tethered, ready for a quick departure. "Jake, stop," Zara insisted, pulling her hand from his. "I need to understand what's happening." Jake glanced around nervously, checking they weren't followed. "I came to warn you. I heard about the arrest, knew they'd eventually question my identity. Then I got word you were asking questions, putting yourself at risk. How did you know about the fire tonight?" "I didn't," Jake admitted. "I've been watching your boarding house for 2 days, trying to find a way to speak to you privately, when I saw the flames." He shook his head, unable to complete the thought. "It wasn't an accident," Zara said grimly. "A man named Edwards threatened me yesterday. This was a warning." Jake's expression darkened with fury. "Edwards. He works for Hargrove, one of the businessmen I testified against." He took her hands in his. "Zara, these men won't stop. They've already falsely arrested one man. They've burned a building that could have killed dozens. They'll do worse." "Then we have to stop them," Zara said firmly. "We have evidence now, evidence of their crimes. It's not that simple." Men like Hargrove control judges, newspapers, politicians. "Not all of them," Zara countered. "There's a lawyer, Prescott, who's been defending the arrested man, and a reporter, Harper, who's been investigating. With your testimony, my testimony," Jake interrupted incredulously. "Zara, I'm a wanted man. The moment I show my face officially, I'll be arrested. For what crime? Telling the truth about war profiteers. That's not illegal." "No, but they'll find something. They always do." Jake ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "I came to get you out of Sacramento, not to turn myself in." "And go where? Back to hiding in the mountains," Zara challenged. "For how long, Jake? The rest of your life?" Jake had no answer for that. "These men tried to kill me tonight," Zara continued, her voice softening. "They'll try again, whether you're with me or not. The only way to truly be safe is to expose them, stop them for good." Jake's internal struggle was visible on his face. "If I do this, if I come forward, there's no guarantee we'll win, and if we lose." "Then we'll face that together," Zara said, taking his hand. For a long moment, Jake was silent, weighing her words against his years of caution and fear. Finally, he nodded. All right, but we do this carefully, on our terms. The following morning, Jake and Zara met with Prescott in his office, having arranged the meeting through a trusted messenger. The lawyer was initially skeptical, but as Jake detailed his experiences, his testimony before Congress, the threats that followed, his decision to disappear into the wilderness, Prescott's expression changed from doubt to conviction. "This corroborates everything I've suspected," he said when Jake finished his account. "Hargrove and his associates have been manipulating this case from the beginning, but without hard evidence of their interference." "What about the fire?" Zara asked. "Edwards threatened me explicitly, and hours later the boarding house burned. Circumstantial," Prescott said regretfully. "They'll claim coincidence. We need more." "What if we could get them to incriminate themselves?" Jake suggested. "Edwards clearly knows who I am, what I look like." "If he saw me, no," Zara interrupted firmly. "That's too dangerous." "Actually," Prescott said thoughtfully, "it might work, not a direct confrontation, but something more controlled. The governor is hosting a reception tomorrow night for Eastern investors. Hargrove and Edwards will certainly be there." "You want Jake to walk into a room full of powerful enemies?" Zara asked incredulously. "Not exactly," Prescott smiled. "I want Captain Foster to make a dramatic return to society, with witnesses present when Hargrove and Edwards recognize him and, more importantly, when they react to seeing him." The plan was audacious, but carefully crafted. Prescott would attend the governor's reception as a respected member of Sacramento society. Zara, introduced as his niece visiting from Boston, would accompany him. Jake would arrive later, using Prescott's invitation, introduced simply as Captain James Foster, recently returned to Sacramento. "The key," Prescott explained, "is to have multiple witnesses to their reaction when they see you. If they betray recognition, if Edwards especially shows any sign that he knows you're the real Foster, not the man in jail, it strengthens our case considerably. And if they try something more direct." Zara asked worriedly. "They won't," Prescott assured her. "Not in the governor's mansion, surrounded by witnesses. They're too careful for that." The following evening found Zara in a borrowed gown of deep blue silk, her hair arranged elegantly, standing beside Prescott as they mingled with Sacramento's elite. The governor's mansion was ablaze with light, the reception rooms crowded with politicians, businessmen, and their wives. "There's Hargrove," Prescott murmured, nodding toward a corpulent man holding court near the refreshment table. "And Edwards beside him." Zara recognized Edwards immediately, the same cold eyes, the same calculating demeanor that had chilled her on the street. "They don't seem concerned about the fire," she observed bitterly. "Men like that rarely concern themselves with consequences that affect others," Prescott replied. "Ah, perfect timing." A murmur ran through the crowd as a new arrival was announced. "Captain James Foster," the doorman called, and all eyes turned to the entrance. Zara's breath caught. Jake stood framed in the doorway, almost unrecognizable in formal evening attire, his beard trimmed neatly, his usually unruly hair combed back. He looked every inch the distinguished Union officer, complete with the quiet confidence of command. As planned, Prescott moved forward to greet him, bringing Jake into the gathering as though they were old acquaintances. Zara remained where she was, watching Edwards and Hargrove for their reaction. She didn't have to wait long. Edwards glanced up at the announcement, his expression shifting from polite disinterest to shock, then alarm as he recognized Jake. He urgently tugged Hargrove's sleeve, whispering something that made the larger man's face flush red with anger or fear, perhaps both. Jake circulated through the room, accepting introductions, playing his role perfectly as he gradually moved closer to where Hargrove and Edwards stood. Zara followed his progress, her heart pounding with anxiety. When Jake finally approached the two men, Prescott at his side, the tension was palpable. "Mr. Hargrove, Mr. Edwards," Prescott said smoothly. "May I introduce Captain James Foster? Captain, these gentlemen are investors from the East." Jake extended his hand, his expression revealing nothing. "Gentlemen," Edwards recovered first, a forced smile appearing on his lips as he took Jake's hand. "Captain Foster, your reputation precedes you." "Does it?" Jake asked mildly. "I've been away from civilization for some time." "What reputation might that be?" Before Edwards could respond, Hargrove interrupted, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. "You have nerve showing your face here, Foster, after the lies you spread about honorable businessmen." A hush fell over the nearby guests, attention drawn to the confrontation. Jake remained calm. "Lies, Mr. Hargrove, I testified to facts. Facts about substandard supplies that cost American lives. Facts that apparently still trouble you years later." "You're a fraud," Hargrove sputtered. "A liar who disappeared rather than face the consequences of his slander." "Interesting accusation," Prescott interjected smoothly. "Considering you currently have a man in jail whom you claim is Captain Foster, a man who clearly is not him, as we can all see." Murmurs rippled through the gathering crowd. Edwards placed a restraining hand on Hargrove's arm. "This isn't the place for such discussions," he said tightly. "On the contrary," Jake replied, his voice carrying clearly to the assembled onlookers, "this is precisely the place. In public with witnesses, so there can be no misunderstanding, no mysterious fires, no threats against innocent women." At this, Zara stepped forward to stand beside Jake. Edward's eyes widened in recognition. "Miss Vance survived your attempt to silence her," Jake continued. "Just as the truth will survive your attempts to bury it." Hargrove's face contorted with rage. "You have no proof of anything. It's your word against mine, and who will believe a disgraced captain over a respected businessman?" "I will," came a new voice. Governor Stanford himself had approached the group, drawn by the commotion. "Captain Foster's testimony was instrumental in exposing corruption that cost our Union dearly during the war. If he has further evidence of wrongdoing, I assure you, sir, it will be heard fairly." Edwards, seeing the situation deteriorating rapidly, attempted damage control. "Governor, this is all a misunderstanding. Captain Foster is confused." "I'm not confused at all, Mr. Edwards," Jake interrupted. "Nor was I confused when you had an innocent man arrested in my place. Nor when you threatened Miss Vance. Nor when the boarding house where she resided mysteriously caught fire hours later." The governor's expression hardened. "Serious allegations, Captain. Mr. Prescott, as an officer of the court, do you stand by these claims?" "I do, Governor," Prescott confirmed, "and I have documentation supporting Captain Foster's testimony, both from the war and regarding recent events." "This is outrageous," Hargrove blustered. "I won't stand here and be slandered." "Then perhaps you'd prefer to sit in a jail cell while these allegations are investigated," the governor suggested coldly. "Sheriff," he called to a uniformed man nearby, "please escort Mr. Hargrove and Mr. Edwards to your office. I believe they have some explaining to do regarding a case of mistaken identity and possibly arson." As Hargrove and Edwards were led away, protests falling on deaf ears, the governor turned to Jake. "Captain Foster, I owe you an apology on behalf of the state of California. It seems justice has been delayed in your case." "Not just in mine, sir," Jake replied. "There's an innocent man in your jail who deserves immediate release." "Consider it done," the governor assured him, "and I'd appreciate a full statement from you regarding these events." Corruption has no place in California, especially when it extends from the East Coast. As the excitement subsided and the reception gradually returned to its normal rhythm, Jake found a moment to pull Zara aside into the relative privacy of an alcove overlooking the garden. "You were right," he said quietly. "Running and hiding would never have ended this." Zara smiled, taking his hand. "Does this mean Captain James Foster is ready to rejoin society?" Jake's expression grew serious. "I don't know about society, but I do know I'm tired of being alone." He hesitated, then continued. "When I pulled you from that wreckage in the mountains, I never imagined you'd end up saving me in return." "We saved each other," Zara corrected gently. Jake's fingers brushed her cheek, then moved to touch the wooden bluebird pendant she still wore around her neck. "You kept it." "Of course I did." Zara covered his hand with her own. "It reminded me of you, of hope and new beginnings." New beginnings, Jake repeated thoughtfully. I like the sound of that. He took a deep breath. Zara, I know this is sudden and perhaps improper, but these past months have taught me that life is too unpredictable to waste time on conventions. I love you. I think I have since I first saw your face looking up at me from that wreckage. Zara's heart soared at his words. I love you too, Jake. I think I realized it the night before I was supposed to leave for Sacramento, the night you gave me this pendant. Jake's smile was luminous as he took both her hands in his. Then may I be bold enough to ask if you might consider a future with me? Not hiding in the mountains, but not necessarily in the bustle of Sacramento either. Perhaps somewhere in between where we could both build something meaningful. Are you proposing, Captain Foster? Zara asked, her eyes shining with happiness. Inelegantly, but yes, Jake admitted with a soft laugh. I don't have a ring, and my timing leaves much to be desired, but my heart is entirely yours if you'll have it. Zara's answer was to rise on tiptoe and kiss him, heedless of propriety or the possibility of onlookers. Yes, she whispered against his lips. 1,000 times yes. As spring blossomed across California in 1869, Zara Vance became Zara Foster in a simple ceremony at the newly built church in Pine Tree Gulch. The settlement had transformed significantly in the months since Zara had first passed through it on her ill-fated journey to Sacramento. With the wrongfully arrested man freed and Hargrove and Edwards facing charges for their crimes, Jake had used his suddenly restored reputation to secure a land grant near the growing mining settlement. There, he and Zara had built a home larger and more comfortable than his mountain cabin, but still embraced by the wilderness they both had come to love. The school board of Pine Tree Gulch had eagerly offered Zara the position of teacher for their growing community, recognizing the value of an educated Eastern woman willing to settle in their remote location. Jake, meanwhile, had found purpose in serving as a guide and surveyor for the expanding railroad, his knowledge of the mountain terrain proving invaluable. As Zara stood on the porch of their home on a warm evening in June, watching the sunset paint the distant peaks gold and crimson, Jake joined her, slipping an arm around her waist. "Penny for your thoughts, Mrs. Foster," he murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. Zara leaned into his embrace, content in a way she had never imagined possible when she'd first set out from Boston. "I was thinking about journeys," she replied. "How the one that seemed like disaster, the wagon crash in the blizzard, turned out to be the beginning of everything good in my life." Jake's arm tightened around her. "I still remember the moment I found you under that wreckage, how still you were. I thought I was too late, but you weren't," Zara reminded him, turning to face him. "You saved me." "We saved each other," Jake corrected, echoing her words from the governor's reception. "And we'll keep doing so, I imagine, for many years to come." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across their land, Zara and Jake Foster stood together, their lives irrevocably intertwined by a chance encounter in a blizzard that had become a love to weather any storm. And in the years that followed, as their family grew to include first a son with his father's blue eyes and later a daughter with her mother's determination, as Pine Tree Gulch blossomed into a proper town with Zara's school at its heart, as Jake's reputation was fully restored, and the shadows of the past finally receded, they would often tell the story of the wagon crash and the rescue, the first chapter in their unlikely love story. A love story that began with disaster but built, day by day and year by year, into a life neither of them could have imagined when fate first brought them together in the snow-covered wilderness of the Sierra Nevada, where a trapped woman and a solitary cowboy found in each other the home they had both been seeking.